We've decided to merge your role with someone younger." The words, spoken by my boss Elaine Voss, were delivered with the clinical precision of a surgeon severing a vital artery. They didn't echo in the sterile, glass-walled conference room. They simply hung in the air, a toxic, invisible cloud that sucked all the oxygen out of the space. Her voice, a sharp, metallic thing, cut through the low hum of the building's air conditioning, a scalpel slicing through the fabric of my 14-year career. I sat there, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. I watched her, this woman who had been my superior for a mere 6 months, deliver what she clearly believed was my professional death sentence. The fluorescent lights overhead, a constant, irritating buzz, cast harsh, unflattering shadows across her angular face. A flicker of a smile, a slight upward twitch of her lips, betrayed a deep, smug satisfaction. She leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, a queen surveying the execution of a disloyal subject. "My name is Claudia Remsen, and I am 52 years old. For the past 14 years, I had been the Senior Director of Biomedical Innovation at Meditech Fusion Labs, here in the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina. This wasn't just a job, it was my life's work. I had poured more than half of my career, my very soul, into building this diagnostics division from the ground up. When I started, it was nothing more than a concept, a hopeful entry in a business plan. Now it was a thriving, globally recognized hub of innovation. We didn't just crunch numbers or follow established formulas. We turned abstract, theoretical research into tangible, life-saving medical breakthroughs. The designs I had personally conceived and developed had accelerated our research timelines by a staggering 43%. We weren't just faster, we were better. My leadership had attracted lucrative and prestigious partnerships with top-tier universities across 3 continents, relationships I had personally nurtured with care, trust, and mutual respect. But apparently, none of that mattered to Elaine. She had been appointed department head of biomedical strategy just 6 months earlier, a whirlwind of corporate jargon and disruptive energy. She arrived with a freshly minted Harvard MBA, an insufferable certainty that everything that came before her was archaic, and a vocabulary composed almost entirely of buzzwords. Synergy, optimization, leveraging assets, disruptive innovation, they fell from her lips like sterile, meaningless confetti. At 44, she was the epitome of the new corporate guard, treating the delicate, nuanced art of innovation like a simple spreadsheet problem to be solved with ruthless efficiency. From day one, she'd made her disdain for me clear. My years of hands-on experience, the very foundation of our division's success, were viewed not as institutional knowledge, but as outdated baggage. I was the old guard, a relic to be tolerated until she could gracefully, or not so gracefully, sweep me aside. "Jason will be absorbing your responsibilities," she continued, the words a second, more brutal incision. She gestured with a perfectly manicured hand toward the young man sitting uncomfortably beside her. Jason Min. He was 28, fresh-faced, undeniably brilliant, and oozing with a kind of raw, untapped potential that I had always loved to mentor. The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. I had been the one to recommend him for his junior analyst position just 2 years ago. I saw a spark in him, a genuine curiosity that I believed, with the right guidance, could be shaped into something extraordinary. Now, he was my replacement. He wouldn't meet my gaze. His eyes were glued to the screen of his laptop as if it held the secrets of the universe, a desperate attempt to find a focal point anywhere but on my face. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his jaw. He was a pawn in a game he hadn't asked to play. "He's closer to current trends," Elaine added, a dismissive wave of her hand accompanying the casual cruelty of her words. "The industry is moving toward rapid execution and fresh thinking. We need someone who can keep pace with modern methodologies." A deep, glacial cold began to spread through my chest, but I fought to keep my expression neutral, my face an impassive mask. I had been in the corporate world long enough to understand its brutal politics. 14 years of watching ambitions rise and fall, of navigating the treacherous currents of power plays and backroom deals, had taught me one crucial lesson. Showing emotion in moments like this was a sign of weakness. It was blood in the water, and sharks like Elaine lived for the scent of it. She was waiting for me to crack. She wanted me to protest, to plead, to give her the supreme satisfaction of seeing me break down. I would give her no such pleasure. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate breath and nodded. Merging roles is efficient, I said, my voice astonishingly calm and even. I trust the results will speak for themselves. A flicker of surprise, quickly masked, crossed Elaine's face. She had expected a fight, tears, a desperate appeal. My stoic acceptance had thrown her off script. Good, she recovered, her tone clipped. We'll announce the restructuring next week. Jason will officially take over your projects on the 15th. The meeting was over. As I stood up and walked out of the conference room, my posture straight, my head held high, I caught a fleeting glimpse of Jason's expression. The professional composure he had been struggling to maintain had shattered. In his eyes, I saw pure, unadulterated terror. He, unlike Elaine, understood exactly what had just happened. They weren't just eliminating my position. They were dismantling the very foundation of everything I had built. They were setting a fire and handing the extinguisher to a man who didn't know how to use it. And as the heavy door clicked shut behind me, a cold, hard certainty settled in my heart. This decision, this arrogant, short-sighted move, would come back to haunt them. And it would happen far, far sooner than they could possibly imagine. The irony wasn't lost on me as I cleared out my office that afternoon. 14 years of groundbreaking, life-altering work, of late nights poring over data and early mornings collaborating with the brightest minds in the field, were being reduced to the contents of 3 cardboard boxes and a sad, dying succulent plant someone had given me for my 10th anniversary. I had joined Meditech Fusion Labs when it was little more than a scrappy startup operating out of a converted warehouse on the dusty outskirts of Raleigh. It was Marcus Ellington, our chief technology officer and a visionary in his own right, who had recruited me personally. He'd lured me away from a comfortable, high-paying position at a pharmaceutical giant with a promise that was far more valuable than stock options. "We're not just developing diagnostics, Claudia," he told me during our first interview, his eyes alight with passion. "We're revolutionizing how medical research happens. I need someone who can think beyond traditional boundaries, someone who understands that the patient is at the end of every data point." Those words had resonated with me on a profound level. Growing up as the daughter of a small-town doctor in eastern North Carolina, I had watched my father struggle with outdated diagnostic equipment, his frustration palpable as he waited for lab results that could mean the difference between life and death for his patients. That experience had shaped my entire career philosophy. Innovation should serve humanity, not just corporate profit margins. And for 14 years, I had transformed that philosophy into tangible, world-changing results. The rapid screening protocols I developed had shortened diagnostic timelines from weeks to mere days. The research partnership program I personally spearheaded had brought in over $37 million in collaborative funding, allowing us to tackle projects our competitors could only dream of. Most importantly, my team's work had directly contributed to faster, more accurate treatment options for patients dealing with complex autoimmune disorders and rare genetic conditions. We were saving lives. Elaine Voss, with her spreadsheet-driven worldview, saw none of that value. From the moment she'd arrived, she'd questioned every established process, her MBA-trained mind incapable of grasping the intricate web of relationships and trust that underpinned our success. She pushed for what she called disruptive innovation, but in reality, her approach was just chaos disguised as progress. She'd already alienated 2 of our most reliable university research partners with her abrasive negotiation style and unrealistic timeline demands, causing damage I'd had to work tirelessly to repair. Jason had tried to defend me in those early, tense meetings, pointing out that my established protocols were still producing better, more reliable results than anything our competitors had developed. But Elaine had quickly and publicly made it clear that loyalty to outdated leadership, as she so delicately put it, would not be tolerated in her new organizational structure. The kid was trapped. It was a brutal choice between professional ethics and career survival, and unfortunately, in the cutthroat world Elaine was creating, survival usually won. My leadership style was the antithesis of hers. My relationships with my colleagues, with the dozens of young researchers I'd mentored over the years, including Jason, had always been built on a foundation of mutual respect and collaborative spirit, not fear-based authority. Many of them had gone on to leadership positions at other prestigious companies, creating a powerful network of professional relationships that Elaine clearly didn't understand or value. As I taped the last of my boxes shut, my mind replayed the 3 major projects currently in development, the crown jewels of my division. The automated genetic sequencing system, a project that would change the face of personalized medicine, was a mere 6 months from completion. Our infectious disease rapid response platform, designed to identify emerging pathogens in hours instead of days, was just about to enter its final phase of clinical trials. And our personalized medicine diagnostics program was attracting intense, serious interest from several major international pharmaceutical companies. Each of these initiatives required deep, nuanced institutional knowledge and the carefully maintained relationships I had spent years building with external partners. Elaine, in her hubris, believed that Jason's raw technical skills and his proximity to current trends could replace all of that. She was about to get a very expensive education on just how wrong she was. The first warning sign for them, the first domino in the chain reaction I knew was coming, materialized during the formal transition meeting 2 days later. Jason sat across from me in my soon-to-be former office, his notebook open and pen ready, a parody of a leader about to take the reins. But his hands were trembling slightly. "Claudia, I have to be honest," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I'm ready for this level of responsibility. The genetic sequencing project alone involves partnerships with 7 different institutions. I've never managed anything close to that scope." I leaned back in my chair, studying his anxious expression. "Jason, you're a brilliant analyst," I began, my voice soft but firm. "Your technical understanding of the underlying science is actually better than mine in some areas. But this isn't just about technical knowledge anymore." "What do you mean?" "When Dr. Harrison from Duke calls about protocol modifications, he's not just asking for scientific input. He's testing whether we still have the institutional stability to be reliable partners. When the clinical trial coordinators need timeline adjustments, they're looking for someone who understands the regulatory implications of every decision. These relationships took years to build." Jason's face had gone pale. Elaine said, she said the technical aspects were the most important part. She thinks the relationship management is just networking fluff that anyone can handle. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Anger. It was a cold, sharp anger at the sheer, destructive arrogance of it all. This was worse than I'd anticipated. Elaine wasn't just underestimating the complexity of my role, she was actively dismissing the most critical components of it. "Jason," I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, "have you told her about the upcoming review with the International Pharmaceutical Consortium?" The what?" His eyes widened. My heart sank. "The consortium review. It was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. It's a make-or-break evaluation that would determine whether Meditech receives a $48 million partnership contract. I've been preparing for this review for 18 months, building relationships with key decision-makers and carefully positioning our research to align with their strategic goals." Jason's pen had stopped moving entirely. "Elaine never mentioned anything about that. She just said I'd be taking over your current projects and maintaining operational continuity." The phrase operational continuity would have been laughable if the situation weren't so serious. Elaine had reduced 14 years of strategic relationship building to a corporate buzzword. She'd convinced herself that innovation happened in a vacuum, that partnerships were just administrative details that could be managed by anyone with a decent spreadsheet. "Jason," I said, seeing the panic building in his eyes as he tried to manage responsibilities he never fully understood. "I need you to understand something. I had a choice to make. I could let him flounder, let him take the fall for Elaine's catastrophic miscalculation, or I could throw him a lifeline. The decision was easy. This wasn't Jason's fault." I said carefully, "When this transition happens, you're going to be under enormous pressure. If you need help with anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to me." He nodded gratefully, but we both knew the reality. Once I was officially out, Elaine would make sure that any communication between us would be seen as undermining her authority. Jason would be completely on his own, representing a company whose leadership had just demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of how biomedical research actually worked. As I watched him gather his notes and head back to his cubicle, a small, sad figure swallowed by the corporate machine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching the first domino in a chain reaction that would devastate everything I'd spent my career building. The official announcement of the strategic restructuring came the following Monday morning. Elaine had scheduled an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. She stood at the front, a PowerPoint presentation titled Organizational Excellence Through Strategic Restructuring, glowing behind her. I sat in the back row, a ghost at my own funeral, watching my colleagues' faces as she explained how my elimination would enhance operational efficiency and accelerate innovation pathways. I noticed several of my former team members exchange worried glances. Dr. Patricia Reeves, our lead geneticist and a woman I'd mentored for a decade, raised her hand tentatively. "What about the consortium review next month?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Claudia has been the primary point of contact for that project." Elaine's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. "All existing relationships will transition seamlessly to our new leadership structure. Jason has been thoroughly briefed on all ongoing initiatives." That was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. Jason himself looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. I'd seen that expression before. The deer-in-headlights look of someone who just realized they were in far deeper water than they'd understood. After the meeting, Marcus Ellington approached me in the hallway. At 60, he was one of the few people at Meditech who'd been there longer than I had. His weathered face showed genuine concern as he pulled me aside. "Claudia, I want you to know this decision didn't come through me," he said quietly. "I found out about it the same time as everyone else." "I figured as much," I replied. "This has Elaine's fingerprints all over it." Marcus ran a hand through his graying hair. "The board is backing her restructuring initiative. They think she's going to modernize our operations and improve our profit margins. I've tried to explain the value of institutional knowledge, but they're focused on quarterly projections." "What about the consortium contract?" His expression darkened. "That's what worries me most. Do you really think Jason can handle that presentation?" I considered the question carefully. "Jason is brilliant, Marcus. Given 6 months of preparation and proper mentoring, he could probably handle it. But 3 weeks, with no background on the political dynamics between those companies? It's going to be a disaster." "Can you help him? Unofficially?" I shook my head, a profound sadness settling over me. Elaine made it very clear that my input won't be welcome during the transition. She views any ongoing involvement as undermining her authority. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "You know, I've been thinking about your offer from Cresswell Electric's biotech division. Maybe it's time to seriously consider other opportunities." That caught my attention. 3 months earlier, I'd received a recruitment call from Cresswell Electric, a major technology company that was expanding into medical device development. They'd offered me a position as Chief Innovation Officer, heading up their new biomedical research initiative. At the time, I'd politely declined, feeling loyal to Meditech and the work we were doing. "They're still interested," I said slowly, a new idea beginning to form. "In fact, they called again last week." "What kind of resources are they offering?" The words tumbled out, a list of everything I had ever dreamed of. Unlimited research budget for the first 2 years, complete autonomy over project selection and team building, and they're specifically interested in rapid diagnostic development. Exactly the kind of work I've been doing here. Marcus's eyebrows lifted. That sounds like an incredible opportunity. It is, I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. And here's the thing, Marcus. They've also expressed interest in acquiring some of the diagnostic protocols I've developed. Apparently, there's a gray area in my employment contract about intellectual property rights for innovations I created using my own methodologies. The implications hung in the air between us. Over the years, I developed several diagnostic protocols using research methodologies I'd created independently, often working on my own time with resources I'd personally secured. The legal department had never clarified whether those innovations belonged to me or to Meditech, assuming it would never become an issue. Claudia, Marcus said carefully, if you're thinking about leaving, you should probably have a lawyer review your employment contract. Already done, I replied. A wave of exhilaration washed over me. Turns out my intellectual property rights are much more extensive than Elaine realizes. The rapid screening protocols, the genetic sequencing algorithms, the infectious disease detection systems, legally, I have legitimate claims to most of the innovations that make our diagnostics division competitive. Marcus's face had gone pale. Elaine doesn't know about this, does she? She never bothered to ask. She was so focused on eliminating my position that she never considered what I might take with me when I left. The cracks started to show by Wednesday morning of my final week. I was officially working my last few days, but I could see the panic building in Jason's eyes as he tried to manage responsibilities he never fully understood. The first crisis came during a routine conference call with our partners at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead researcher on our joint autoimmune diagnostics project, had called to discuss timeline modifications for their clinical trials. It should have been a straightforward conversation. I'd been working with Elena for 3 years, and we'd developed a collaborative rhythm that made these discussions efficient and productive. But Jason was fielding the call now, and I could hear the strain in his voice from my office down the hall. He was asking for clarification on basic protocol elements that Elena had assumed were already understood. More concerning, he was making commitments about resource allocation and timeline adjustments without understanding the broader implications for our other partnerships. 20 minutes into the call, Jason appeared in my doorway, his face flushed with embarrassment. Claudia, Dr. Vasquez is asking about the integration protocols for the European consortium data. I don't know what she's talking about. I glanced around to make sure Elaine wasn't within earshot, then quietly explained the background. 6 months ago, we agreed to share diagnostic protocols with 3 European research institutions. Elena's team is supposed to integrate their findings with the European data before the consortium review. It's a key component of our value proposition. How was I supposed to know that? It should have been in the transition documentation, he stammered. I said gently, did Elaine provide you with the partnership history files? Jason shook his head. She said I should focus on current technical requirements, not historical administrative details. I felt a chill run down my spine. Those historical administrative details represented millions of dollars in research investments and carefully negotiated agreements with international partners. Elaine had literally thrown away the institutional memory that held our entire collaborative network together. The disaster I'd been anticipating arrived sooner than even I had expected. On Thursday afternoon, I was finishing up my final transition documents when Jason burst into my office, his face white with panic. Claudia, we have a problem, he said, closing the door behind him. I think I made a major mistake with the infectious disease protocols. My stomach dropped. What kind of mistake? Dr. Martinez from the Clinical Trial Coordination called this morning about the rapid response platform. He was asking about modification protocols for the detection algorithms. I thought he was talking about standard calibration procedures, so I authorized a 30% sensitivity adjustment. I felt the blood drain from my face. Jason, please, tell me you didn't authorize that without checking the baseline parameters. His silence confirmed my worst fear. The infectious disease rapid response platform was our most sensitive project, a system designed to detect emerging pathogens in clinical samples within hours instead of days. The detection algorithms were calibrated to incredibly precise specifications, with sensitivity levels that had been fine-tuned over 18 months of rigorous testing. A 30% sensitivity adjustment wouldn't just affect accuracy, it would fundamentally alter the entire diagnostic framework. Worse, if clinical trials proceeded with the modified parameters, the results would be completely invalid, potentially setting back the project by years. How many clinical sites received the modified protocols? I asked, already reaching for my phone. 17. The modifications went out this morning. I immediately called Dr. Martinez, but the damage was already evident in his voice. Claudia, thank God you're calling. We've been getting completely inconsistent results since implementing the modifications. 3 sites are reporting detection failures, and 2 are showing false positives. What's going on? There's been a miscommunication about the protocol specifications, I said carefully. We need to halt all testing immediately and revert to the original parameters. Claudia, if we halt testing now, we'll miss our clinical trial deadlines. The regulatory review is scheduled for next month. The regulatory review. In my focus on the consortium presentation, I'd almost forgotten about the Food and Drug Administration review that was supposed to approve our rapid response platform for emergency use authorization. This review represented 2 years of preparation and potentially millions of dollars in revenue. Dr. Martinez, I understand the timeline pressure, but proceeding with invalid parameters will destroy the entire approval process. We need to prioritize accuracy over speed. After hanging up, I turned to Jason, who looked like he was about to be sick. Jason, this isn't your fault. You were put in an impossible situation without proper preparation. But we need to act quickly to minimize the damage. What do I tell Elaine? That was the question I'd been dreading. Elaine would have to be informed about the mistake, but her likely response would be to minimize the problem and push forward with a flawed testing, exactly the wrong approach for a situation that required careful damage control. Tell her exactly what happened, I said. Emphasize that halting the trials temporarily is the only way to preserve the regulatory approval process. Jason nodded miserably and headed toward Elaine's office. I watched him go, knowing that this conversation would probably determine whether Meditech could salvage any value from the infectious disease project. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Marcus Ellington, and his voice was tight with stress. Claudia, I just heard about the clinical trial situation. How bad is this? Bad, Marcus. But not irreparable if we act quickly and honestly with the regulatory authorities. Elaine wants to continue with the modified protocols and claim the inconsistencies are within acceptable variance ranges. I closed my eyes. It was exactly the wrong response, but completely predictable. Marcus, that approach will guarantee regulatory rejection and potential sanctions. The FDA doesn't tolerate data manipulation, even when it's motivated by timeline pressure. I know. That's why I'm calling you. We need your help to fix this situation. Marcus, I'm no longer an employee here. Any official involvement would require Elaine's approval. Then what do you suggest? I took a deep breath, realizing that this moment would define everything that happened next. I suggest you document everything that happened, preserve all the original data, and prepare for the possibility that this project might be delayed significantly. And Marcus, I added, my voice hardening, you might want to start thinking about whether your current leadership structure is equipped to handle this kind of crisis. The call from Kevin Walsh at Cresswell Electric came at exactly 9 a.m. on Friday morning, just as I was clearing the last items from my desk. Claudia, we've accelerated our approval process. Cresswell Electric is prepared to make you a formal offer, effective immediately. I stepped out into the parking lot for privacy. What kind of timeline are we talking about? We'd like you to start Monday. Full authority over biomedical research and development, unlimited budget for your first 18 months, and a signing bonus that I think you'll find quite attractive. The offer was everything I'd hoped for and more. Chief Innovation Officer, complete creative control, and resources that dwarfed anything I'd ever had access to at Meditech. But the timing felt almost too perfect. Kevin, I have to ask, is this acceleration related to what's happening at Meditech? His laugh was knowing. Let's just say that certain clinical trial delays and regulatory complications have created an interesting opportunity in the rapid diagnostics market. We'd like to move quickly to establish our position. Within 30 minutes, I was sitting in my car, reviewing a contract that would completely transform my career. The intellectual property clauses were particularly generous. Cresswell Electric was prepared to license my diagnostic innovations at rates that would make me financially independent, while giving me the resources to develop them further. But the most interesting clause was buried in the partnership section. Cresswell Electric was prepared to offer consulting contracts to qualified biomedical researchers who might be interested in transitioning from academic or corporate research environments. In other words, they were ready to poach the best talent from companies that had made poor strategic decisions. I thought about Patricia Reeves, our lead geneticist, who'd looked so worried during Elaine's reorganization announcement. About Dr. Martinez, who was probably dealing with angry clinical coordinators and regulatory officials. About Jason, who was almost certainly drowning in responsibilities he'd never been prepared for. As I signed the contract, I realized that Elaine's strategic restructuring had just handed Cresswell Electric the opportunity to acquire not just my innovations, but potentially the entire intellectual foundation of Meditech's diagnostic division. The consortium presentation was scheduled for Wednesday morning. I learned about the outcome from Marcus Ellington, who called me at my new office at Cresswell Electric. "Claudia, it was a complete disaster," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Jason tried his best, but he simply didn't have the background knowledge to answer their technical questions. When they asked about the European integration protocols, he had to admit he didn't know what they were talking about. I winced, imagining Jason's humiliation in front of 5 pharmaceutical executives. What was their response? They terminated the partnership discussion immediately, $48 million gone. But that's not the worst part. What's the worst part? 3 of the consortium companies have already reached out to us, asking for your contact information. They want to discuss potential partnerships with Cresswell Electric. The irony was almost too perfect. Elaine had eliminated my position to enhance operational efficiency, but in doing so, she destroyed the very relationships that made efficiency possible. The consortium companies hadn't been interested in Meditech's technology. They'd been interested in working with me. "Marcus, there's something else you should know," I said carefully. "The infectious disease project delays have created regulatory complications that extend beyond just timeline issues. The FDA is asking questions about institutional stability and research oversight." What does that mean? It means they're concerned about whether Meditech has the expertise to manage complex clinical trials. If they lose confidence in your institutional capabilities, it could affect all your pending approvals. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "How much damage are we looking at?" "Potentially everything, Marcus. The regulatory authorities don't just evaluate individual projects, they evaluate the companies behind them. If they decide that Meditech no longer has the institutional knowledge to manage biomedical research safely, they could halt all your clinical programs." The silence that followed spoke volumes about the magnitude of what Elaine's restructuring had set in motion. As I settled into my new role at Cresswell Electric, watching Meditech's carefully built reputation crumble from my office window, I reflected on how completely Elaine had underestimated the true cost of experience, and how satisfying it felt to watch her learn that lesson through the spectacular collapse of everything she thought she had so cleverly acquired.